Hi, I'm Tom Scott. In order to survive and thrive as a professional film or TV composer, one must have talent, technical skill, and drive. These qualities are vital to be sure. However, the business of music for the big and small screen, as with any business, also requires the social skills, persuasion, tact, and diplomacy. This is especially true when dealing with a studio executive, director, producer, or co-composer. Over the years, I have seen, heard, and personally faced a difficult or unpleasant challenge that called for a carefully crafted response, or in some cases no response at all. Careers have often been advanced or curtailed based on the ability to respond in an effective and appropriate manner. Here are 3 true stories that illustrate the point. Nathan Scott, my father, worked for several years as a staff composer and orchestrator at Republic Pictures in the early 1950s. Republic, like the other major studios, had a full orchestra on staff 5 days a week. These studios made movies in assembly line fashion, starting with the script and casting, and then the actual shooting of the movie, and finally post-production, which included editing, adding sound effects, and music to create the finished product. One day, the studio had hired an efficiency expert to evaluate the various departments to make cost-saving recommendations. The employees were understandably concerned that their jobs might be in jeopardy. The fear of cutbacks spread to the music department as well, and its composers, copyists, and orchestra members. When this expert arrived one day at the music scoring stage, he sat silently in the corner for the afternoon, observing the orchestra at work, all the while writing furiously on his clipboard. Weeks later, his pronouncements were given to the studio, and this is what he had to say about the music department. I spent the day observing the orchestra at work, and I noticed there are several musicians who play frequently, while others in the orchestra sit doing nothing much of the time. A tremendous savings could be achieved if those who play less often are eliminated and the remaining orchestra members play all the time. His solution to the inefficient orchestra problem was blatantly idiotic, to say the least, but the music department wisely decided not to comment. Doing so might embarrass the executive who hired this idiot, and causing him to take revenge on the more vocal complainers within the music department, had there been any. It proved to be the right decision because no action was ever taken to economize the orchestra, and nobody had to get fired for stating the obvious. Mainly, the recommendation was just completely stupid and idiotic. In this case, no action proved to be the right course of action. Here's another example of a very deft reply. In the early 1960s, Lalo Schifrin, a wonderful composer, famous composer and a friend, received a call from TV producer Bruce Geller to write the theme for an upcoming series called Mission Impossible. You all know it by now, don't you? It became one of the best-known TV themes ever, and the first TV theme written in 5/4 time, by the way. Geller explained that there was a team of principal characters in the show, and as the mission proceeded, there would be many cuts back and forth between the team members as they performed their various separate skills. Then Geller added, "I want a different theme for each character." Lalo knew immediately that this would present a musical problem. 5 different themes, one for each character, would make for very, very difficult musical transitions. It would be a real mess musically to have all these 5 themes cutting back from one to the other. It would just make no sense. So Lalo put his thinking cap on and replied, "I tell you what, Bruce, instead of playing a theme for each of the characters, why don't we just play The Mission?" Producer Geller's idea had been derailed, but the alternative presented by Lalo was so obvious and well put that Geller readily consented to this one mission musical approach. This suggestion led to a second and equally well-known Mission Impossible theme. If you saw the show, it's that one that it goes bum ba dum ba da 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 da. You know, if you all watch old episodes of that show, that thing plays through all 5 characters And it also binds the whole show together in a way that 5 separate themes would never have done. Here's another example. One day in 1993, I got a call from my music agent, who also happened to represent Grover Washington. Grover was a fantastic saxophone player, as you may know, and also a dear friend. He had composed his first score for a TNT television movie called Percy and Thunder, which starred James Earl Jones and Billy D. Williams. There was a problem, though. The producers were unhappy with Grover's music for the film. My agent hoped that I could save the score without having to completely redo it. In exchange, I would receive a fee, of course, and a co-composing credit. I told him I would try to help, but I would have to hear Grover's score first in order to make a final decision. When I heard the score, it quickly became clear what the major problem was. There was just too much saxophone. Grover played almost constantly through the picture, often stepping on dialogue and other critical sound elements. His love of playing the saxophone had clouded his judgment as a composer, and that combined with his inexperience had created problems in the dubbing room where all the sound elements, dialogue, sound effects, and music were being mixed. It just wasn't working. My first task was to separate the music cues into 3 categories: those that needed to be replaced completely, those that just needed less saxophone, and those that needed no change at all. And the biggest problem, of course, was a diplomatic, not a musical one. How was I going to do what needed to be done and keep Grover's pride, which I cared about a lot, keep it intact at the same time? I knew I had been given the blessing of the film's producers. To them, I was like going to be a savior. But because I had such high regard for Grover, both personally and professionally, I wanted to, do it gracefully, as we said about the process of revising his score. When he arrived in L.A. from his home in Philadelphia, I picked him up at the airport, told him his music needed some creative editing, and that for the most part, he'd done a fine job. I wasn't sure that my agent had told him exactly what the problem was the way he told me, but however, I just tried to, soft pedal the thing because of my friendship with him. And by the way, the music he had written was great. It just didn't always fit the scenes that had been written for. He seemed genuinely pleased that I could help him out of his jam. However, once we got down to the business of redoing those cues that needed it, Grover once again had trouble playing for just a few seconds as required by the scene. I told him play from bar 2 to bar 6, for example, and he wouldn't stop playing until somewhere in bar 10. It took him several takes to learn how to abbreviate his solos, and eventually he got the hang of it. In the end, everybody was happy, particularly me, because I had managed to straddle the line between Grover and the needs of the film.